September light comes cold over Orleans County, Vermont, and Harlan Voss is backing his old flatbed up to a milk house that has not held a cow in 9 years. In the woods behind the big orchards, down in the gully where the loaders push the drops, he has been shoveling bruised apples into barrels since first light. Culls. Windfalls. The soft, dented fruit nobody will put in a box. He hauls it home by the ton into a barn that stands empty except for rows of wooden barrels, and he tells no one why. Over at the Saturday market in Barton, the co-op men see his truck loaded with what looks like garbage fruit, and they laugh out loud. Del Farnsworth from the buying floor calls across the lot, "You feeding hogs, Harlan, or just cleaning up after us for free?" A cider mill buyer named Roy Pelkey shakes his head and says the old man has finally lost it. 2 years this goes on. 2 years of the whole market grinning at the widower who drives the back roads collecting rot. Then a state truck turns up the lane, and an inspector from the agriculture department steps out with a clipboard and a 30-day order to shut him down. And that is when the county starts asking the question that had been sitting in that milk house all along. What can a man make from a truckload of spoiled apples that stops the laughing and gets the whole county talking? To understand what Harlan Voss was building out there in the dark, you have to go back to the winter he buried his wife. If you have ever been told your idea was worthless, this story is for you. Subscribe and follow along, and tell us where you are watching from. The winter of 2019 came hard to Orleans County, and Harlan Voss buried his wife Ruth in the frozen hill above the orchard her father had planted. He was a dairyman, then no longer, the herd sold 2 years gone, the barn standing empty, and the bank 1 poor season from taking the place. After the last neighbor drove off, he sat at the kitchen table with 2 books in front of him. One was Ruth's recipe book, the pages soft and stained, her hand sloping across notes on canning and putting fruit up for the long dark. The other was his father's orchard ledger, 53 years of rows and yields and weather, all in pencil. He read them the way some men read scripture. An apple does not stop being sweet because it falls. He took a windfall from the bowl and cut it clean in 2, then drew the knife across his tongue. The same sugar sat there, bruised skin and all. A windfall carries the same sugar as the fruit lifted careful off a branch. Bruise it, dent it, let it lie in the wet grass, and that sugar sits there, patient, waiting for something to work on it. Ruth had known this. Her book held pages on what a household could do with fruit too poor to sell, sugar coaxed one way and then another, slow and warm and covered. His father's ledger listed the drops as loss, ton after ton shoved off into the gully every fall. Outside, snow settled over 40 acres of bare trees. Harlan turned the page under the lamp, following a line of pencil down to a single word he would not say out loud for 2 years. That first spring after the burial, Harlan drove to the loading yard at Kingdom Orchards outside Irisburg and found the operations man, a wide fellow named Curtis Belrose, watching a skid loader push a mound of drops toward the tree line. It cost money to haul that fruit off, and Belrose knew it. "You want the culls," he said, half laughing. "The whole rotten pile is yours, and I will not charge you a dime for the favor." They shook on it in the mud. From then on, Harlan came with barrels every week, filling them off the gully with a scoop shovel, sorting soft from spoiled by hand while Belrose told the crew the old widower had found a use for garbage nobody else wanted. Word carries fast in a county this size. By the second Saturday market in Barton, Del Farnsworth had a crowd. He walked slow around the flatbed, lifting a bruised apple like it was evidence. "Voss is going into the compost trade," he announced. and Roy Pelkey added that a man who lost his cows was now farming flies. The other stands grinned. Somebody asked, plain and mean, what he even meant to do with a truckload of fruit too poor to press. Harlan did not answer. He never answered. He stood by the tailgate with his ledger in his coat, waiting for the last of them to run out of laughing. And when the market thinned toward noon, he climbed into the cab, drove the empty back roads home to the milk house, and reached for the first sealed barrel to see what the winter had done inside it. The first sealed barrel gave off a smell like bread and cider when Harlan pried the lid, and a skin of pale scum floated on top. He had crushed the culls with a borrowed press in October, poured the juice into oak, and shut the bung tight against the air. That was the first turn, the one Ruth's pages called the alcohol. Wild yeast, riding in on the skins of the very fruit the market called garbage, had been eating the sugar in the dark all winter and breathing it back out as something stronger. He dipped a finger. It bit the tongue, dry and hard, near 7% by his father's old rule of thumb. Now came the part the ledger warned him not to rush. He racked the young cider into shallow crocks, filled each one only half full, and left the lids off in the warm corner by the wood stove. Air was the whole point. A second creature, a bacteria that could not work without oxygen, would take the alcohol and turn it into acid, slow and warm, and open to the room. Ruth had written one line beside it, underlined twice. Keep it shallow. Keep it breathing. He set 8 crocks along the sill and waited. Weeks passed. A gray raft began to form across the top of the nearest crock, thick and rubbery, the mother the old bulletins promised. He touched it and drew back. It was rubbery and cold under his finger, the mother the old bulletins promised. A gallon of finished vinegar, he would learn, took near 15 pounds of that dumped fruit. There is one line his father drew, in heavier pencil than the rest, and Harlan learned the weight of it the hard way. A bruise and a rot are two different things. Crush an apple against the tailgate and the cells split, the juice runs, the sugar is still good sugar. Let that same apple sit soft and brown in the wet grass too long, and a mold has moved in, running threads a man cannot see with his eye. Think of a loaf of bread with a spot of blue on the crust. You can cut the spot away and tell yourself the rest is clean, but the fibers carry it deeper than the color shows. It is the same with fruit gone truly rotten. Certain molds that grow on soft apples leave a poison behind them, a thing the food scientists call patulin. And here is the part that matters most. Neither tern touches it. The yeast does not eat it. The acid does not burn it out. It rides straight through the crock and into the bottle. Harlan found this out with a scoop shovel and a careful nose. He had taken fruit off the pile that was long past bruised and well into rot, and by the smell alone, something sat wrong in it. 11 barrels went back down the hill that week. A whole autumn of work poured out at a few cents a pound. He set the loss in the ledger and drew his own hard line beneath a single word. Firm. So how does a man tell the fruit that will pay him from the fruit that will poison him? Sorting it by hand off a heap the county still calls garbage. By the middle of December, the second batch simply stopped. Harlan had carried 8 fresh crocks down to the stone cellar to free the corner by the stove, and there, in the cold dark under the house, the mother quit building. A month went by. The liquid stayed sharp with alcohol and thin on acid, half-turned and going nowhere. And no line in Ruth's pages told him why. So he did a thing he rarely did. He drove into Barton and climbed the steps of the little brick library. The woman at the desk, Marion Pelletier, had run the reference room for 30 years, and she did not laugh when a stubborn widower asked her how a man makes vinegar go. She disappeared into the back and returned with a brittle pamphlet, printed in 1943, its cover stamped with the seal of the Vermont Agricultural Station. "Folks forget these old papers," she said, sliding it across the counter. "But the bugs in your crock have not read anything newer." The pages spelled out the thing the seller had hidden from him.
The acid bacteria are living creatures, and they will not work in the cold. Keep the crocks between 65 and 80 degrees, the old text warned, with air moving across the top, or the second turn goes to sleep and waits. His cellar had been sitting near 50 the whole month. He drove the back roads home before dark, carried the crocks up the stairs 2 at a time, and set them along the warm sill by the stove. Within a week, a fresh skin crept back across the surface, pale and wrinkling, reaching for the rim. A cheesemaker named Delabouche drove up from Hardwick one Thursday in April and asked, plainly, to taste what the old milk house held. Harlan drew a jar from the third barrel and set it on the bench without a word. She dipped a spoon, held it under her nose, then to the light, then to her tongue. Clean, sharp, a long apple finish riding under the bite. She bought all 40 gallons on the spot, at $9 a gallon, to wash the rinds of her aged rounds and brighten her brines. A week on, the cook at a supper table in Craftsbury took what was left for his dressings and his braised pork, and paid $2 a bottle over the price Harlan had been afraid to name. The money steadied the place. What settled deeper came on a Sunday. His daughter, Nora Voss, had driven up from Burlington the way she did near once a month, half sure her father was going under out here alone. She stopped in the milk house doorway and took in the rows. Oak barrels stacked 3 deep, crocks along every warm sill, a pale mother riding the top of each. She walked the length of them, slow, reading the chalked dates aloud to no one. Then she turned at the far wall and walked the rows again. Whatever she had driven 3 hours to say to him, she left unsaid. She set her keys on the bench, pushed up her sleeves, and reached for the sorting knife by the door. Press a soft apple hard enough, and 2 things come off the rack. The juice runs clear into the pail, and behind it stays a flat brown cake of skin, seed, and crushed flesh, squeezed near dry. Country people call that cake pomace, and for years it followed the drops over the bank and into the gully to rot with the rest. He pinched a broken edge of the cake and rolled it between his fingers. It came apart damp and heavy in his hand, still carrying oil in its skin and fiber in its walls, worth more than the spent brown rag it looked like. A cow will work through it on a cold morning, the leftover sugar and fiber carrying real feed into her. Turned onto a pile with manure and old leaves, it wakes the soil bugs and hands its nitrogen back to the ground come spring. And the peel and core hold pectin, the quiet thread that stiffens a spoonful of jam into a set jar on the shelf. Fruit too low grade for any packing house can still give up near 16 pounds of pectin out of every 100. So the cake was a second harvest hiding inside the first, and the whole county had been letting it rot over the bank. Weigh the crushed apples going onto the rack, then weigh the juice that runs out, and count the difference honest. Near 1 pound in every 3 stays behind as that pressed brown cake. For every 3 loads tipped over the bank, a full load had been thrown away twice. On a gray morning in May, a state car came up the dirt lane and parked beside the milk house. The man who stepped out wore a clipboard and a division seal on his jacket, and he gave his name as Wallace Trombley, Dairy and Food Safety. A complaint had come in, he said, about a man selling bottled vinegar with no license, no tested acidity, no written process on file. By law, an acidified food had to hold its acid under a fixed line, measured and recorded, or it could not cross a counter for money. Harlan did not argue. He set his father's ledger and Ruth's pages on the bench and let the man read the chalk dates down every barrel. Trombley drew a sample from the third crock, dipped a meter into it, and waited for the needle to settle. "Where did you learn to hold it here?" Trombley asked, tapping the glass. "A pamphlet from 1943, Harlan said, "and 40 years of my father's pencil." The reading sat well under 4.6 on the acid scale, the point below which the dangerous bugs cannot grow. Every barrel he drew read the same. Trombley wrote for a long while, then looked up at the rows stacked 3 deep in the cold light. The stop order still went on the door that day, 30 days to file a written process and license the room. That same week, a late frost blackened the blossoms across the county, and the mill that had laughed at his garbage fruit stood short of apples. Harlan read the notice twice and asked one thing only. Could a man who had done the work right for 2 years lose the place for never having written it down? The license came through on a Friday in June, granted across the counter at the state office in Newport, while 3 co-op men waited their turn behind him. Curtis Belrose stood among them, cap in hand, there to renew the permit for Kingdom Orchards. He watched the clerk stamp Harlan's written process and hand back a signed page, and he found nothing to say. 2 weeks on, a truck from the cider mill came up the dirt lane. The buyer, who had laughed loudest at the market, a heavy man named Gordon Leach, climbed down slow into the yard. The late frost had burned the county's blossoms black, and his tanks stood empty for the season. His tanks stood empty, and he needed fruit, needed the man he had laughed at to sell it to him. Harlan led him through the milkhouse, saying little, past the fogged glass and the sweet cellar damp, past the crocks riding their pale mothers along the warm sills. Leach read the chalked dates the way a man reads a bill he owes. They wrote it out at the bench before dark. The mill would ship its culls and its pressed pomace by the ton at 2 cents a pound under a signed hand. The garbage fruit had a price now, and the man who named it had once paid good money to bury it. Leach capped his pen, lifted his eyes to the rows, and slowly took the cap from his head. Drop a ripe apple on the grass, and it does not go poor. The bruise spreads brown under the skin, the flesh gives where it struck the ground, but the sweetness inside stays exactly where it sat on the branch. A knock does not drain sugar the way a cracked jug drains milk. The damage is a door, not a leak. Growers have a small glass tool for reading sweetness, a single drop of juice on the lens, a line of light through it, and a number comes up on a scale they call bricks. Pull 1 apple off the branch by hand and let another fall from the same limb into the weeds. Then read them both an hour apart. Bruising browns the skin and softens the corner. It does not spend the sugar, and sugar is the only thing the yeast is asking after. The little wild ferments riding on the fruit cannot see a box or a gully. They cannot tell a graded apple from a reject. They read one thing off the juice, the sweetness, and they set to work turning it. Think of a bank clerk counting coins spilled from a torn purse. The rip in the leather changes nothing in the count. So the fruit the orchards paid to bury carried the same worth into a barrel as the fruit they crated and shipped. Harlan knew it now to the pound, and one cold morning he walked out to the empty rows of the milkhouse, laid a fresh chalk line across the first clean stave, and began to work. Another September came, cold over Orleans County, and Harlan Voss backed the old flatbed up to the mill gate at Kingdom Orchards, the same gate where he had once begged for the drops other men shoved down the gully. This time the pomace was loaded for him by contract, and a young grower named Ellison Pike stood at the tailgate, hat in his hands, watching the bins come down. "They tell me a load like this used to cost you money to be rid of," Pike said. $40 a haul to push it in the gully," Harlan answered. "Now it comes to me under a signed page." The young man ran the arithmetic out loud, the way a man does when he cannot quite believe it. 2 tons of drops off a single bed. A gallon of finished vinegar for every 15 pounds of that fruit. Better than 200 gallons a load, bottled and set on a shelf at $7 a bottle, with the pressed cake going back out to cattle and compost so that nothing rode the truck twice. A load the county still called garbage carried close to $5,000 of worth, if a man knew the 2-step turn and wrote it down. Pike asked to learn it. Harlan handed him his father's ledger and told him to copy the heavy line first, the one about rotten fruit and the poison it can hide, and to never cross it. Here is the plain of it. The world throws away what it has not learned to read, and the quiet ones with a pencil and a warm, shallow crock are the ones who read it. The sugar never cared it hit the ground. Most men just never bothered to check. What would you have done with a truckload of fruit nobody wanted? Tell us where you are watching from, subscribe, and we will be back next week with another.